The question stopped the room, not because it was asked loudly. The most powerful questions never are. It arrived in the specific quiet of someone who holds enough authority that they do not need volume to produce weight, the kind of person whose words land before they finish speaking because the room has already learned that what comes out of that mouth matters. The question arrived in that quiet, and it landed on the people who heard it like a stone dropped into still water. Who are you? 3 words. And in those 3 words, something was being confessed that the person asking them may not have fully understood they were confessing. Because powerful people do not ask that question about people they have already categorized. They do not pause the room and turn the full instrument of their attention towards someone they have dismissed. The question itself was the acknowledgement. Before the answer existed, before you had spoken a single word in response, the asking of the question confirmed something that the people who spent years trying to keep you categorized and contained and operating within the limits they assigned you were now going to have to live with. You had become unrecognizable. Not in the sense of being lost or diminished or reshaped into something foreign to yourself. Unrecognizable in the specific, devastating, completely irreversible sense of having grown so far past the version of you that existed when the categorization was first applied that the category no longer fits. The label they wrote on the container no longer matches what is inside it. And the most powerful person in the room, with the full, trained, highly sophisticated instrument of their perception, looked at you and understood immediately that what they were encountering did not correspond to anything in the existing file. So they asked. And the asking was the beginning of everything. I want to tell you what it means when a question comes from that altitude. Because there's a specific quality to the attention of people who operate at the level where that question was asked, and understanding that quality changes how you understand not just the moment but the entire sequence of seasons that produce the moment. People at that altitude do not ask questions out of social courtesy. They do not ask who you are because the conversation required it or because the context made it appropriate or because they had a moment to fill and the nearest available thing to fill it with was an inquiry about your identity. People who carry that kind of weight in their presence and that kind of precision in their attention ask questions because something they encountered produced a gap in their existing understanding that the existing understanding could not close. You produced that gap. You, simply by being present in the space, simply by occupying the room at the full dimension of what you have become, created a discrepancy between what the most powerful instrument in the room expected to find and what it actually found. And the discrepancy was significant enough, and the instrument was precise enough, that it stopped everything and asked. This is not a small thing. This is the specific, documented, completely reliable signal that precedes the reorganization of a person's position in the world. When the question comes from that altitude, it does not return to the one who asked it without consequence. It does not dissolve into the air of the room and leave everything arranged exactly as it was before the asking. It changes the architecture of the room. It changes the calculation of every person who witnessed the asking. It changes the specific valuation that the most powerful person present has applied to the person the question was about. Which is you. You were revalued in the moment the question was asked. Not by your own declaration. Not through any campaign or strategy or carefully constructed presentation of your qualifications. Simply by being present as what you have become in a room that had access to both the old category and the current reality, and producing the gap between the two that made the most powerful person in the room stop and ask. Let me tell you about the sequence of seasons that produced this moment, because the moment did not arrive without a sequence, and the sequence matters enormously for understanding what the moment means and what comes next. There was a season when you were known primarily through the version of you that other people described. Not the version you presented. Not the version that existed when someone engaged with you directly, without the mediation of someone else's account. The version that circulated in the rooms you were not in, carried by the mouths of people who had decided, for reasons that served their own interests, that the version they were distributing was an accurate one. That version was not accurate. It was a functional version, functional in the sense that it accomplished what it was designed to accomplish, which was the management of your position relative to the positions of the people distributing it. It was detailed enough to be convincing and vague enough to be unfalsifiable. It contained enough truth, extracted carefully from the full context that would have made it meaningless, to feel like a complete picture. And it circulated in the rooms that mattered, the rooms where the decisions were made, where the resources were allocated, where the doors were opened or closed, with the efficiency of a story that had been designed for circulation. You were being pre-introduced everywhere you had not yet arrived. And the pre-introduction was not yours. This is the specific, sophisticated cruelty of reputation management directed at someone before they are present to contradict it. By the time you walked into a room, the room already had a version of you, already had the category applied, already had the framework for receiving you that had been provided by people who needed that framework to hold in order for their own position to remain stable. You were not encountering the room fresh. You were encountering the room preloaded with a version of you that was constructed to make the encounter go in a specific direction. And the direction was always contained. For a long time, the containment had partial success. Not because it was true, because it arrived first. Because the architecture of human perception tends to confirm what it was primed to find, and the priming had been thorough. Because even the most perceptive people in the most important rooms had been handed a framework that their own perception then filtered your actual presence through, finding in the encounter what the framework told them to expect rather than what was actually there. But here's the thing about prolonged direct contact with reality. It eventually overrides the framework. Not immediately. Not in the first encounter or the second or sometimes even the 10th. But there is a threshold, a specific accumulation of direct evidence that contradicts the framework, beyond which the framework can no longer hold. Beyond which the perception that was primed to find one thing keeps finding another thing instead, and the finding of the other thing eventually produces the question that no framework can survive being asked honestly. Does this framework actually correspond to what is in front of me? And when the most powerful person in the room asks that question, and the answer is clearly no, the framework does not adjust gradually. It does not politely revise itself. It collapses. All at once. With the specific, undramatic, completely total efficiency of a structure that was held together by the pressure of maintained belief rather than by the weight of actual truth, and that therefore has nothing left to hold it once the belief is withdrawn. The framework that was built around your name collapsed the moment the question was asked, because the question was an admission that the framework had failed. And everything that was built on the framework, every decision made based on the category, every door managed based on the version, every resource allocated or withheld based on the description, is now subject to revision. In the direction of what actually exists. In the direction of what the most powerful person in the room just looked at directly and found impossible to fit into the category they were handed. In your direction. I want to speak now about what you carry that made the question unavoidable. Because it was unavoidable. I want to be clear about that. You did not engineer this moment. You did not strategize your way into the field of vision of someone powerful enough to ask the question at an altitude that matters. You did not calculate the sequence of presentations or carefully constructed impressions that would produce the specific discrepancy that stopped the room. You simply became what you were always becoming. And what you were becoming was too real to be contained by an inaccurate framework forever. The first thing you carry that made the question unavoidable is the quality of your presence under pressure. There is a specific behavior that people who were primed to expect a particular version of someone look for when they finally encounter the actual person. They look for the confirmation of the framework. They look for the behaviors and responses and qualities that the framework described, because the human perceptual system is extraordinarily good at finding what it was told to find and extraordinarily resistant to finding what it was not prepared for. Under ordinary circumstances, this means the framework survives most encounters. Under pressure, it does not. Pressure strips the performance layer from everyone in the room. Pressure reveals the actual quality of what a person is made of rather than the presented quality of what they want to be perceived as. And when a room full of people who were primed with a framework encounters the person the framework was about, under conditions of real pressure, and that person's behavior under the pressure is so completely at odds with what the framework described that there is simply no way to reconcile the two. The framework breaks. You behaved under pressure in a way that the framework could not account for. Not dramatically. Not with the kind of visible, performed competence that announces itself and invites confirmation. With the specific, quiet, completely unself-conscious quality of someone who has been under real pressure before and has long since stopped being destabilized by it. The quality of someone whose roots go deep enough that surface turbulence does not reach the place where their actual stability lives. The room noticed. The most powerful person in the room noticed most. The second thing you carry that made the question unavoidable is the specific quality of your thinking at speed. There is a kind of intelligence that is only visible when the situation moves faster than preparation allows. When the prepared answers run out and what remains is the raw, unmediated, completely unscripted response of whatever the person actually is when the scaffolding of rehearsal is no longer available. This is the intelligence that cannot be performed because there is no time for performance. It either exists in the person or it does not, and when it exists, it is unmistakable. It exists in you. And in the moment when the situation moved faster than preparation allowed, and the people in the room who were watching through the lens of the framework expected to see the behavior the framework described, the hesitation, the deflection, the reaching for the prepared answer that no longer fit the question, what they saw instead was something they had not been told to expect. They saw you think. Not the performed version of thinking that people display when they want to appear thoughtful. The actual movement of a mind that was genuinely engaging with what was in front of it. The specific, slightly unsettling quality of a person who is not managing their response but producing it, in real time, from the actual depth of what they understand rather than from the shallower layer of what they prepared. This quality, in a room full of people who spend most of their time in the presence of managed, performed, carefully prepared responses, reads as extraordinary even when it is not trying to. You were not trying to. Which is precisely why it read the way it did. The third thing you carry that stopped the room was the specific combination of what you know and how you carry the knowing. Knowledge in isolation is common. Every room that operates at altitude is full of people who know things, who have accumulated information and refined their frameworks and developed the specific expertise that their position required. Knowledge at altitude is not rare. It is the baseline. What is rare is the combination of knowing and the particular way of carrying the knowing that you carry. You carry it without the performance of carrying it. The performance of expertise is one of the most common behaviors in rooms that operate at altitude. People who know things tend to ensure that the people around them understand that they know things, not always through direct declaration, but through the specific behavioral vocabulary of expertise, the language and references and framings that signal membership in the community of people who have access to this particular knowledge. You do not perform your knowing. You simply use it. In the absence of performance, in a room where performance of knowing is so ubiquitous that it has become invisible, the way the hum of a machine becomes inaudible to people who live near it, reads as something so unusual that it stops the people who are paying attention. It stopped the most powerful person in the room, who then asked, "Now I need to tell you something about what happened on the other side of the room when the question was asked." Because you were not the only person present. And the question did not lay in the same way on everyone who heard it. There were people in that room who had been part of the distribution of the framework. Not all of them knowingly. Some of them had simply repeated what they were handed, in good faith, from sources they had no reason to question. But some of them knew. Some of them had been active participants in the circulation of the version of you that was designed to keep the room preloaded against you. And those people, when the most powerful person in the room stopped everything and asked who you were, when the implicit message of the question landed, which was that the existing answer to that question was insufficient, felt something shift in their position that they are still, in this moment, trying to calculate the full implications of. The shift was this. They are now in a room where the most powerful person present has publicly indicated that the version of you they were distributing does not correspond to the actual person. They cannot pretend they did not hear the question. They cannot pretend the question did not imply what it clearly implied. They cannot continue to circulate the old version as though the room had not just watched the version fail to contain what it was supposed to contain. Their primary tool for managing your position in this room just became visible as inadequate. In front of the one person whose assessment of its adequacy matters most. The specific discomfort of that position, the discomfort of having staked your credibility on a version of someone that the most powerful person in the room just looked at and found insufficient, is a discomfort that does not resolve quickly. It requires either the complete revision of the position or the doubling down on it in the hope that the revision can be avoided. And doubling down, in a room where the question has already been asked and heard and will be remembered, is not a sustainable strategy. They are recalculating. The recalculation has already begun. And the direction the recalculation is moving is toward the question the most powerful person already asked, which means it is moving toward you. Toward the accurate version, the direct encounter, the assessment of what is actually there rather than what was described. This movement is not something you need to manage or accelerate or position yourself to benefit from. It is simply the natural consequence of a question being asked at altitude by someone who had the precision to see the gap and the authority to make the seeing of the gap consequential. You stood in the room. The gap was visible. The question was asked. Everything that follows is the automatic, unavoidable, completely reliable consequence of those three things occurring in that sequence. I want to tell you what the question means for the rooms that come after this one. Because this is not the last room. This is not the culminating room that contains the full meaning of every season that preceded it. This is the turning room, the room where the direction changes, where the current that was running against you reverses and begins running with you, where the preloading of rooms with the inaccurate framework becomes increasingly difficult because the most powerful person in the most significant room just indicated publicly that the framework is inadequate. That indication travels, not through any announcement or formal revision of the record, through the specific, silent, extraordinarily efficient social transmission of information about how the most important person in the room responded to the person they were not supposed to take seriously. People who are in the room will carry the question with them into every subsequent conversation where your name appears. People who are not in the room but who are in the social proximity of people who will hear about the question within a time frame that corresponds directly to the significance of the moment. The question is already traveling. And as it travels, it is doing the specific work that no campaign you could have launched would have been able to do as efficiently. It is revising the preloading. It is arriving in rooms before you do and replacing the framework that was distributed against you with a different kind of anticipation, the anticipation of people who know that the most powerful person in a significant room looked at you directly and found the existing category insufficient. They want to see for themselves. This is the specific form of positive anticipation that precedes the kind of opening that changes the trajectory of a life. Not the warm, welcoming anticipation of people who have decided they already like you before they meet you. That anticipation produces its own kind of distortion. The sharp, attentive, genuinely curious anticipation of people who have been told, by a source they respect, that what they are about to encounter does not fit any existing category and will require them to form a new one. They are ready to be surprised. You should let them be surprised. Fully. By the same unmanaged, unperformed, completely direct quality of your actual presence that surprised the room where the question was first asked. Not as a strategy for producing the surprise. Strategy produces performance, and performance is the enemy of the quality that stopped the room. But by continuing to show up as what you are, at the full dimension of what you are, without the layer of management that the previous season required. The management is no longer protective. In the previous season, the management served a function. The careful, conserved, edge-softened deployment of what you carry was the correct approach for rooms that were preloaded against you, rooms where the full expression of what you are would have been filtered through the framework in ways that confirmed the framework rather than contradicting it. Managing the expression was the strategic response to the strategic preloading. The preloading is compromised now. The question compromised it. And in rooms where the preloading is compromised, the managed expression is not a protective measure. It is a cost. Because the rooms that are now looking at you, the rooms that heard the question and are forming their own anticipation based on the information the question carried, are looking for the thing that made the question necessary. They are looking for the unmanaged version. The version that produced the gap that the framework could not close. The version that was too real to be contained. Show them that version. Let me now speak about something that the question did to you internally, because the external consequences are only half of what the moment produced. There was a version of you that had been living with the accumulated weight of years of being encountered primarily through the framework rather than directly. Years of walking into rooms that were preloaded. Years of the specific, subtle, exhausting experience of knowing that what you are and what the room expects to find are two different things, and of having to navigate the gap between them in every interaction, every conversation, every attempt to be received as the actual person rather than the described one. That weight is specific. It accumulates differently from other kinds of difficulty. It does not accumulate as injury or grievance or the kind of damage that can be pointed to and named. It accumulates as the particular fatigue of someone who has been doing an invisible extra labor in every room they have entered, the labor of trying to make contact with the actual person, to be seen as what they are rather than what they were described as, to find the moment in each encounter where the framework cracks enough for genuine engagement to happen. This labor is exhausting in a way that is difficult to explain to people who have not done it. And the question ended it. Not perfectly. Not in all rooms simultaneously, and not for all time, and not without the continuing work of allowing the direct encounter to build the revised understanding over time. But the question ended the era in which the framework was the dominant instrument through which you were being received in the rooms that matter. Something in you that had been working hard for a very long time can now rest. Not from the work, from the invisible, additional, specific labor of trying to make contact through a framework that was designed to prevent it. The question was the crack through which the contact finally happened. And everything that comes through that crack now arrives in a space of direct encounter, unmediated by the framework, available to be received as what it actually is. Feel the difference. It is the difference between swimming in open water and swimming in open water while wearing something heavy that was not designed for swimming but that you had learned to move through the water with anyway, and that you had stopped noticing the weight of because it had been there long enough to feel like a permanent feature of the experience. The weight is gone. The question removed it. And the water, the open water of rooms that are now encountering you without the framework doing the receiving for them, that water moves differently now. Carries you differently. Responds to the actual force of your movement rather than the reduced force that was left after the weight had taken its share. You are going to cover distance in the next season that would have been impossible to cover in the previous one. Not because you are stronger, because you are carrying less. Now I want to speak about who you are. Not who you are in the framework. Not who you are in the description that was circulating in the rooms before you arrived. Not even who you are in the assessment of the most powerful person in the room who asked the question, however significant that assessment now is. Who you are in the full, complete, actual sense of the question when it is asked without the framework mediating the answer. You are someone who was formed under conditions that most people who now occupy rooms at this altitude never experienced. The rooms at altitude are, in the main, occupied by people who arrive through the official channels. People whose trajectory was managed from early, managed toward the appropriate credentials, the appropriate associations, the appropriate sequence of positions and recognitions and institutional affiliations that the official channels require of the people they certify as belonging. Their formation was real. Their capability is real. Their presence at altitude is not a mistake or an accident or a function of illegitimate access. But their formation is fundamentally different from yours. Their formation happened inside the channel. Yours happened outside it. And there is a specific set of things that the channel cannot teach because the channel is the mechanism by which certain things are avoided rather than developed. The channel cannot teach what it feels like to build without the institutional support that the channel provides. It cannot teach the specific quality of judgment that develops in a person who had to navigate without the map that the channel gives its members. It cannot teach the reading of rooms from the position of someone who entered without the pre-clearing that channel membership provides. It cannot teach the understanding of how things actually work that only develops in people who had to figure it out themselves because no one with the official knowledge was sharing it with them. You have all of these things. And the rooms at altitude, for all their sophistication and all their accumulated institutional knowledge and all the extraordinary capability of the people who were formed inside the channel, are full of gaps that only people formed the way you were formed can see and know how to close. This is what the most powerful person in the room encountered. Not just quality. The specific quality that their channel did not produce and could not have produced and that they recognized, in the moment of encounter, as something their room needed. Who are you? The answer is, the person this room did not know it was missing. The person whose absence from the rooms at altitude was producing a specific kind of blindness that no one inside the rooms could identify because they did not have access to the vantage point from which the blindness was visible. The person who has the specific, ungrantable, unimitatable knowledge of what exists outside the channel and how it moves and what it needs and how it actually thinks and what it would take to reach it. The rooms at altitude have been having conversations about the outside without anyone in the room who actually knows the outside from the inside. You know it from the inside. This is the answer to the question. And the person who asked it understood, in the moment the understanding was possible, in the moment of direct, unmediated, framework-free encounter with what you actually are, that the answer was significant. The answer is significant. Not in the self-congratulatory sense of someone who needs their significance confirmed. In the practical, consequential, immediately actionable sense of someone whose presence in rooms at altitude changes what those rooms are able to do and see and reach. You change the room. Not by force of personality or volume of conviction or the kind of presence that simply overwhelms the space it occupies and leaves everyone in it responding to the volume rather than the content. By the specific, quiet, completely structural change that happens when a room that was missing a perspective gains access to it. The room thinks differently with you in it. The most powerful person in the room felt that immediately. Which is why they stopped everything and asked. Let me speak now about what you do with the opening that the question produced. Because the question produced an opening and the opening has a duration and the duration is not indefinite. Every opening that is produced by the attention of powerful people operates on a specific timeline that is determined by the quality of what fills the opening after the attention has created it. The attention created the space. What you bring into the space determines whether the space expands, maintains, or contracts. Bring the real thing. Not the version of the real thing that has been filtered through the habit of managing your presentation in rooms that were preloaded against you. Not the version that had learned to enter at a reduced dimension because the full dimension was consistently received through a framework that distorted it. The actual thing. The complete thing. The version of what you carry that has never had the full, unmediated, framework-free space of a room that is genuinely ready to receive it. The room is ready now. The question opened it. And one has been waiting in the interior of your actual capacity, waiting through every season of the managed presentation, waiting through every room that received the reduced version and confirmed the framework, waiting with the specific, patient, inexhaustible quality of something that was always going to be this, through every season that required it to wait. That is what the room is waiting to receive. The question was not just about the past. It was about the future. Who are you is the question. The answer is still being written. In the rooms that are now open, the rooms that heard the question and understood its implications and have begun to revise the anticipation they carry into their next encounter with you, those rooms are part of the writing. They are where the answer takes its most visible form, where the quality that stopped the room in the moment of the question becomes the quality that changes the room in the duration of the season that follows. You are in the season that follows now. The question has been asked and it has traveled and it is doing its work in the rooms you are about to enter. But before I send you into those rooms, I need to speak about something that nobody discusses when they talk about the moment of recognition. Everyone discusses the opening, the doors, the revised anticipation, the rooms now accessible that were previously managed against you. These are real and they matter enormously, and you should walk through every one of them without hesitation. What nobody discusses is the specific renegotiation that happens inside you when the external validation finally arrives at the scale it arrived at in that room. Because there is a danger in the moment of recognition that is as real as any danger in the seasons of non-recognition, and the danger is this. The external validation, when it arrives from a source powerful enough that the room stops and listens, can become the new source of the interior account, can become the thing you reference, going forward, to confirm to yourself that what you carry is real, can become the mirror you check your own reflection in when the private doubt resurfaces. Do not let the question become your foundation. Not because the question was not significant. It was. Not because the person who asked it does not matter. They do. But because a foundation built on external recognition, however elevated the source of the recognition, is still a foundation built on something outside yourself. And the seasons will come in the trajectory that is now opening, when the external recognition is complicated or contested or temporarily withdrawn. And in those seasons, if the foundation is external, the interior account will shake. Your foundation was already built before the question was asked. The question confirmed it. The question did not construct it. And the distinction between those two things is the difference between a person who moves forward from this moment with the settled, unshakable quality of someone whose knowing is self-sourced and a person who moves forward with the fragile urgency of someone who needs the continued recognition to keep believing what they believe for one clear moment in the room where the question was asked. The question was confirmation. You are the foundation. Act accordingly. Walk in as the answer. Not the managed version. Not the framework surviving version. Not the version that learned to enter rooms that were preloaded and find the moments of genuine contact through the gaps in the preloading. The version the question was about. The full version. The version that the most powerful person in the room had to stop everything to ask about because they had never encountered anything that did not fit into a category they already had, and they needed to understand what they were looking at. Show them. Show them what they were looking at. Show every room that is now open and waiting and carrying the revised anticipation the answer to the question that was asked at altitude about someone who had been kept beneath the altitude for too long and who is now, finally, in the rooms where the question can be asked at a frequency that carries in a space where the answer can be received in full. Who are you? You are the one they were not prepared for. You are the one the framework could not contain. You are the one whose formation happened outside the channel and whose knowledge of the outside is exactly what the rooms at altitude have been missing. You are the one who made the most powerful person in the room stop and ask. And you are, finally, in the position to answer at the full volume of what you actually are. Answer. Not with the rehearsed answer. not with the version of the answer that was prepared in the seasons when you were trying to survive the framework. Not even with the version of the answer that the question seemed to call for in the room where it was asked. With the answer that exists in the full, unmanaged, completely unhurried interior of what you know yourself to be. That answer does not need to fit in any existing category. The question was asked precisely because the existing categories failed. An answer that fits neatly into one of them would not be the answer the question was asking for. The answer the question was asking for is the one that explains why the categories failed, the one that demonstrates, simply by existing, that the person in front of the room is operating from a depth and a breadth and a specific quality of formation that the categories were not built to contain. Let the answer be that big. Not through declaration, through demonstration, through the specific, unself-conscious, completely natural demonstration of a person who is no longer managing their own presence but simply inhabiting it at the full dimension that the formation produced. The room asked who you are. The room is still watching. Show them.